I never thought I'd be the one to say, my husband is cheating on me. But here I am, staring at evidence I can't ignore. The late nights, the new cologne, the secretive texts, it all adds up to a truth I'm not ready to face. How did we get here? 10 years of marriage, 2 beautiful kids, and a life I thought was perfect. Now, I'm left questioning everything. Was it all a lie? As I dig deeper into Mark's deception, I'll discover not just the extent of his betrayal, but also a strength within myself I never knew existed. They say what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. But can I really survive this? And if I do, who will I become in the process? I never thought my life would take such a turn. One day, I was Sarah Thompson, happily married teacher with 2 beautiful kids. The next, well, let's just say things got complicated. It all started on a typical Monday morning. I woke up early, as usual, to get the kids ready for school. Emily, my 8-year-old Sax, was always a breeze to get ready. But Jason, my little 6-year-old troublemaker, was a different story. Jason, honey, it's time to get up, I called out, gently shaking him. 5 more minutes, Mom, he mumbled, burying his face deeper into his pillow. I couldn't help but smile. Come on, buddy, if you get up now, I'll make your favorite pancakes. That did the trick. His eyes shot open, and he was out of bed in a flash. With chocolate chips? He asked eagerly. You bet, I replied, ruffling his hair as I whipped up the pancake batter. I heard Mark, my husband, shuffling into the kitchen. He wrapped his arms around me from behind, planting a kiss on my cheek. Morning, beautiful, he murmured. I leaned into his embrace, feeling content. This was my life, and I loved every bit of it. After breakfast, I dropped the kids off at school and headed to work. I taught English at the local high school, and I absolutely adored my job. There was something special about helping young minds discover the magic of literature. That day, I was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird to my sophomore class. As I watched their faces light up with understanding and empathy for the characters, I felt a surge of pride. This was why I became a teacher. After class, one of my students, Lisa, hung back. She looked troubled. Everything okay? Lisa? I asked, concerned. She hesitated before speaking. Mrs. Thompson, I'm having some problems at home. My parents are fighting a lot, and I don't know what to do. My heart went out to her. I remembered how it felt to be young and scared, feeling like your world was falling apart. Lisa, I'm so sorry you're going through this, I said gently. Remember, it's not your fault. Would you like to talk to the school counselor? I can arrange that for you. She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. I gave her a comforting hug, assuring her that things would get better. As I watched her leave, I felt grateful for my own stable home life. Mark and I had our occasional disagreements, sure, but nothing major. We were solid. That evening, I came home to find Mark had already picked up the kids from their after-school activities. He was in the kitchen, attempting to cook dinner. What's all this? I asked, amused by the sight of him fumbling with pots and pans. He grinned sheepishly. I thought I'd give you a break tonight, but, I might have bitten off more than I can chew. I laughed and joined him in the kitchen. Together, we managed to salvage dinner, turning his burnt attempt at lasagna into a fun, make-your-own pizza night with the kids. As we sat around the dinner table, laughing and talking about our day, I felt a warm glow of happiness. Emily regaled us with stories about her art class, while Jason excitedly shared how he scored a goal in soccer practice. And what about you, dear? I asked Mark. How was your day at the office? He shrugged. Oh, you know, same old, just crunching numbers. I noticed a flicker of something in his eyes, hesitation maybe, but it was gone so quickly. I thought I must have imagined it. After dinner, we helped the kids with their homework, then tucked them into bed. It was our nightly ritual. I'd read a story to Jason while Mark would chat with Emily about her day. Later, as Mark and I got ready for bed, I couldn't help but feel thankful for what I had. A loving husband, wonderful kids, a job I was passionate about. Life was good. I love you, I said to Mark as we settled into bed. He pulled me close, kissing the top of my head. I love you too, Sarah. More than you know. As I drifted off to sleep in his arms, I had no idea that my perfect little world was about to be turned upside down. But that's the thing about life, isn't it? Just when you think you've got it all figured out, it throws you a curveball. And boy, was I in for one hell of a pitch. I first noticed something was off on a Tuesday morning. Mark was standing in front of the mirror, fussing with his hair more than usual. He'd always been a handsome man, but lately he seemed different. New haircut? I asked, running my fingers through his newly styled locks. He grinned, looking pleased with himself. Yeah, thought I'd try something different. You like it? It looks great, I said, and I meant it. But there was a nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach that I couldn't quite explain. As we got ready for the day, I couldn't help but notice other changes. His clothes seemed newer, more fitted. And was that cologne? Mark had never been much for fragrances before. You smell nice, I commented as he kissed me goodbye. Special occasion at work? He shrugged, avoiding my eyes. No, just felt like sprucing up a bit. Gotta keep up with the young guns at the office, you know. I laughed it off, but something felt off. I pushed the thought away as I herded the kids into the car for school drop-off. At work, I found myself distracted. During my free period, I confided in my colleague and friend Rachel. Am I crazy? I asked her. Mark suddenly acting like he's going through some kind of midlife crisis. New clothes, new haircut, even cologne. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Maybe he's just trying to impress you. Keep the spark alive and all that. I wanted to believe her, but the knot in my stomach wouldn't go away. Maybe, I said, unconvinced. That evening, as I was folding laundry, I found a receipt in Mark's pocket. It was for a gym membership. Since when did Mark care about working out? When he got home, I casually brought it up. So, joining a gym, huh? That's new. He looked startled for a moment, then shrugged. Yeah, thought it was time to get in shape. You're always saying how important it is to stay healthy, right? I nodded, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. Why hadn't he mentioned it before? Over the next few weeks, I noticed more changes. Mark was spending more time at the gym, coming home later from work. He was always on his phone, smiling at text messages. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I decided to broach the subject. Mark, I started, trying to keep my voice casual. Is everything okay? You seem different lately. He looked at me, his expression unreadable. Different how? I shrugged, suddenly feeling silly. I don't know. The new clothes, the gym, the cologne. It's just not like you. He laughed, but it sounded forced. Come on, Sarah. Can't a guy try to better himself? I thought you'd be happy. I am, I said quickly. I guess I'm wondering why the sudden change. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Look, I'm approaching 40. I just want to feel good about myself. Is that so wrong? I felt a pang of guilt. Was I being unsupportive? No, of course not. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to make you feel bad. He pulled me into a hug and I breathed in his new scent. It was nice, but I found myself missing his old, familiar smell. I love you, he murmured into my hair. You know that, right? I love you too, I replied, trying to ignore the doubt creeping into my mind. The next day, as I was teaching, I couldn't focus. My mind kept wandering back to Mark. Was I overreacting? Maybe Rachel was right. And he was just trying to spice things up. During lunch, I overheard some of my students gossiping. Did you see Mr. Johnson's new look? One girl giggled. He's actually kind of hot now. I know, right? Her friend replied. I heard he's been working out. My mom saw him at the gym. I felt a flash of irritation. Were teenage girls really checking out my husband? Then I felt ashamed. Mark wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just taking care of himself. Wasn't that a good thing? That evening, I decided to make an effort. I put on a nice dress and did my makeup. When Mark came home, his eyes widened. "Wow," he said, giving me an appreciative look. "What's the occasion?" I shrugged, trying to act casual. "No occasion, just felt like dressing up for my husband." He pulled me close, kissing me deeply. For a moment, everything felt normal again. But then I caught a whiff of that new cologne, and the doubt came creeping back. As we sat down to dinner, I tried to push my worries aside. We chatted about our days, laughed at the kids' antics. It was nice, familiar, but there was an undercurrent of tension that I couldn't quite shake. Later, as I lay in bed, listening to Mark's steady breathing beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Was I creating problems where there were none? Or was my intuition trying to tell me something? I rolled over, studying Mark's sleeping face. He looked peaceful, handsome in the dim light. I loved this man. We'd built a life together, a family. Surely, if something was wrong, he'd tell me, right? But as I drifted off to sleep, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered, "What if he doesn't?" As the weeks went by, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off with Mark. It wasn't just the new clothes or the cologne anymore. It was everything. One night, in the end, I chickened out. No reason, just curious. The next night, Mark didn't come home until after 10 p.m. When he walked in, he smelled of that new cologne, stronger than usual. "How was the meeting?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. He froze for a second, then relaxed. "Oh, boring stuff, budget reports and all that." I nodded, but my heart was racing. Why did it feel like he was lying? Over the next few days, I found myself watching Mark more closely. He was always on his phone, smiling at messages. When I'd walk into the room, he'd quickly lock the screen. One Saturday morning, I was doing laundry when I noticed a lipstick stain on the collar of one of his shirts. My heart dropped. I held the shirt up, staring at that damning red smudge. It could be anything, I told myself. Maybe it rubbed off from me when we hugged. But I knew I didn't own lipstick in that shade. When Mark came home that evening, I held up the shirt. "What's this?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. He looked at the shirt, then at me, his face unreadable. "Must have brushed against someone at work," he said casually. "You know how crowded the elevator gets?" I wanted to believe him. I really did, but the doubt was growing, taking root in my mind. That night, I lay awake long after Mark had fallen asleep. I thought about our life together, our kids, our home. Could he really be? No, I couldn't even think the word. The next week, Mark announced he had a business trip coming up. "Just for a couple of days," he said, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my stomach. "Where to?" He mentioned a city a few hours away. "Boring stuff," he added quickly. "You wouldn't be interested." As he packed his bag, I noticed him slipping in that new cologne. Since when did he wear cologne on business trips? The night before he left, I decided to confront him. "Mark," I started, my heart pounding. "Is everything okay with us?" He looked surprised. "Of course it is. Why wouldn't it be?" I took a deep breath. "You've been different lately. The late nights, the new clothes, the cologne. I feel like you're pulling away from me." His expression softened. He pulled me into a hug, and for a moment, I let myself believe everything was okay. "Sarah," he said gently, "you're imagining things. I love you. You and the kids are my whole world." I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe him. But as he held me, all I could think about was that lipstick stain, those late-night meetings, the secretive text messages. The day Mark left for his trip, I dropped the kids off at school and called in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think straight. I found myself pacing the house, looking at our family photos, remembering happier times. In our bedroom, I opened Mark's closet. His clothes still hung there, a mix of old and new. I ran my hand over them, breathing in his scent. At the back of the closet, I noticed a shoebox I didn't recognize. With shaking hands, I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were receipts, dinner at fancy restaurants I'd never been to, movie tickets, even a receipt for a piece of jewelry. My heart sank. These weren't work expenses. These were date nights. I sat on the bed, holding the box, tears streaming down my face. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? Part of me wanted to confront Mark right then and there. Call him, demand answers. But another part, a part I wasn't proud of, wanted proof. Concrete, undeniable proof. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, going through the motions for the kids' sake. As I tucked them into bed that night, I looked at their innocent faces and felt a surge of determination. If Mark was cheating, and God, I hoped he wasn't, I needed to know, for their sake as much as mine. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to be the naive, trusting wife anymore. I was going to find out the truth, no matter how much it hurt. As I lay in our bed, alone, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Who was she? How long had it been going on? Did he love her? I closed my eyes. I'm paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. After dropping the kids off at school, I came back home and stood in our bedroom, looking around. Where would I even start? I felt like a stranger in my own home, about to invade my husband's privacy. But I needed answers. I started with his nightstand. Nothing unusual there, just some books, his reading glasses, and a half-empty bottle of water. I moved to his dresser, rifling through his socks and underwear, still nothing. Then I remembered his laptop. He always took it with him on trips, but maybe there was something on our home computer. I sat down at the desk in our study, my heart racing as I clicked on the browser history. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Work emails, news sites, sports scores. But then I noticed something odd. There were gaps in the history, like someone had deleted specific entries. "What are you hiding?" "Mark," I muttered, scrolling through the dates. I checked his email next, but found nothing suspicious. Just as I was about to give up, I noticed a folder in his documents labeled "Work Stuff." It seemed innocent enough, but something made me click on it. Inside were more folders with dates as names. I opened the most recent one and gasped. There were photos, dozens of them, and they weren't of our family. They were of a woman. Young, pretty, smiling at the camera. In some, she was alone. In others, I could see Mark's arm around her waist, his face just out of frame. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely click through the photos. There they were, at restaurants, at the beach, even one in front of a hotel. Tears streamed down my face as I stared at the evidence of my husband's betrayal. How long had this been going on? Weeks, months, years. I don't know how long I sat there, cycling through shock, anger, and despair. The sound of my phone ringing snapped me out of it. It was the school. Emily wasn't feeling well and needed to be picked up. Wiping my tears, I took a deep breath. I had to pull myself together. For the kids, I couldn't let them see me like this. As I drove to the school, my mind was racing. What was I going to do? Confront Mark? Pretend I didn't know? I felt lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty. Emily was quiet on the ride home, clearly not feeling well. As I tucked her into bed with some soup and a kiss on her forehead, I felt a surge of love and protectiveness. No matter what happened with Mark, I had to stay strong for our children. Back in the study, I stared at the computer screen. Part of me wanted to dig deeper, to uncover every last detail of Mark's deception, but another part couldn't bear to see any more. In the end, I copied the photos onto a USB drive and shut down the computer. I needed time to think, to process what I'd discovered. That night, as I lay in our bed alone, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos. The woman's smile, Mark's arm around her. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The next day, I went through the motions on autopilot. I got the kids ready for school, went to work, taught my classes, but inside I was screaming. During my free period, I found myself in the school's computer lab. Before I knew what I was doing, I was Googling signs of cheating and what to do if your husband is having an affair. The websites all said the same things. Look for changes in behavior, secretive phone use, unexplained expenses. Check, check, and check. It was like reading a playbook of the last few months of my life. One site suggested hiring a private investigator. For a moment, I considered it. But the thought of a stranger following Mark around, documenting his betrayal, made me feel sick. As I scrolled through page after page of advice for betrayed spouses, I felt a growing sense of anger, not just at Mark, but at myself. How had I let this happen? How had I been so blind? That evening, as I helped Jason with his homework, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. Missing you and the kids. Can't wait to be home tomorrow. Love you. I stared at the message, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. How could he say he loved me while he was off with another woman? For a moment, I was tempted to confront him right then and there, to call him and scream, to demand answers. But I held back. I needed to be smart about this. I needed a plan. As I put the kids to bed that night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Mark right away. I needed more information, more evidence. And I needed to figure out what I wanted to do with that information. Did I want to try to save our marriage? Or was it already too late? I lay awake for hours, turning over possibilities in my mind. By the time the sun rose, I had a plan. I was going to play it cool when Mark got home. I was going to watch and wait and gather more evidence. And then, when the time was right, I was going to confront him with everything I knew. As I got ready for work the next morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked tired, hurt, but also determined. I took a deep breath. You can do this, I told my reflection. You're stronger than you think. With that, I squared my shoulders and headed out to face another day, carrying the weight of my newfound knowledge like a stone in my heart. The day Mark was due to return from his business trip, I was a bundle of nerves. I'd spent the last 2 days oscillating between anger, heartbreak, and a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, there was an innocent explanation for everything. As I heard his key in the lock, I plastered on a smile. Hey honey, how was the trip? I called out, hating how fake I sounded. Mark walked in, looking tired but happy. It was good, he said, giving me a quick kiss. Productive. I wanted to scream, to ask him what exactly had been so productive about his little getaway. Instead, I nodded and asked, Hungry? I can whip up something quick. Over dinner, I watched him closely. He chatted about work, asked about the kids, acted completely normal. If I hadn't seen those photos, I might have believed everything was fine. That night, as we got ready for bed, Mark reached for me. I stiffened, my mind flashing to images of him with the other woman. I'm not feeling well, I mumbled, turning away. He looked concerned. You okay, babe? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. As I lay there in the dark, listening to his steady breathing, I felt more alone than ever. The next few days were a blur of pretending. I went through the motions of our daily life, all while watching Mark like a hawk. I checked his phone when he was in the shower, looked for receipts in his pockets, even considered following him to work one day. But I found nothing concrete. No smoking gun, no irrefutable proof of his affair, just more circumstantial evidence, a call from work late at night, a text that he quickly deleted before I could see it. One evening, as I was folding laundry, I found a shirt I didn't recognize. It was new, expensive looking. As I held it up, a piece of paper fell out of the pocket. My heart racing, I unfolded it. It was a receipt from a jewelry store for a necklace, a very expensive necklace that I had certainly never received. I sat there on the bedroom floor, clutching the receipt, tears streaming down my face. This was it, wasn't it? The proof I'd been looking for? But even as I thought it, doubt crept in. Maybe it was for my upcoming birthday or our anniversary, but deep down, I knew this wasn't for me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. Should I confront him? Demand to see the necklace? But what if I was wrong? What if this really was some surprise for me? The next day at work, I was a mess. I couldn't focus on my lessons, kept losing my train of thought mid-sentence. During lunch, Rachel found me crying in the staff bathroom. "Sarah, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice full of concern. I wanted to tell her everything about the photos, the late nights, the jewelry receipt, but I couldn't bring myself to say the words out loud, to admit that my marriage might be over. "It's nothing," I lied, wiping my eyes. "Just stressed about work." Rachel didn't look convinced, but she didn't push. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "I know, thanks, Rachel." That afternoon, as I was grading papers in my classroom, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. "Working late tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at the message, my hands shaking. Working late or meeting her? Before I could stop myself, I was dialing Mark's office number. His secretary answered. "Hi, this is Sarah Thompson, Mark's wife," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Is he available?" There was a pause. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Thompson. Mr. Thompson left about an hour ago. He said he had a meeting off-site." My heart sank. "Oh, I see. Thank you." I hung up, feeling sick to my stomach. He had lied. He wasn't working late. He was with her. I don't know how I made it through the rest of the day. I picked up the kids on autopilot, made dinner, helped with homework, all while my world was crumbling around me. That night, after the kids were in bed, I sat in the dark living room, waiting. Hours passed. No Mark, no call, no text. It was past midnight when I heard his key in the lock. I steeled myself, ready for a confrontation. But when Mark walked in, he looked normal, tired, but not guilty. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, what are you still doing up?" I opened my mouth, ready to unleash all my suspicions, all my anger. But looking at him standing there, I couldn't even think the word. Couldn't admit to myself what I knew deep down was true. As the first light of dawn crept through our curtains, I made a decision. I needed proof, real, undeniable proof, and I knew just how to get it. Tomorrow, I decided, tomorrow I'd follow Mark myself, and then I'd know once and for all if my husband was cheating on me. I woke up the next morning with a pit in my stomach. Today was the day I'd find out the truth, one way or another. I called in sick to work, something I never do, and waited for Mark to leave for the office. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I sprang into action. I threw on some nondescript clothes, grabbed my car keys, and headed out. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I followed Mark at a safe distance, my heart pounding. He drove straight to his office building, just like any other day. For a moment, I felt foolish. What was I doing? Spying on my own husband. But then I remembered the photos, the late nights, the lies. I had to know. I parked across the street from his office and settled in for a long wait. Hours passed. I watched people come and go, but no sign of Mark. Just as I was about to give up, thinking maybe he really was just working, I saw him. He was walking out of the building, checking his watch. But instead of heading to his car, he started walking down the street. I scrambled out of my car, following at a distance. Mark led me to a small cafe a few blocks away. My heart sank as I saw him greet someone inside. A woman, young, pretty, just like in the photos. I watched through the window as they sat down, ordered coffee. They were smiling, laughing. At one point, Mark reached across the table and took her hand. I felt sick. Part of me wanted to burst in there, to confront them both, but I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching my husband with another woman, feeling my world crumble around me. After what felt like hours, they got up to leave. I ducked into a nearby alley, not wanting to be seen. As they walked past, I heard snippets of their conversation. "Can't wait to see you tonight," the woman was saying. "Me too," Mark replied, his voice warm in a way I hadn't heard in months. I slumped against the wall, tears streaming down my face. It was true. all of it. Mark was cheating on me. I don't know how long I stood there, crying in that alley. When I finally pulled myself together, Mark and the woman were long gone. I drove home in a daze, my mind racing. What was I going to do now? Confront him? Leave him? Try to save our marriage? As I pulled into our driveway, I saw Mark's car. He was home early. Taking a deep breath, I walked into the house. Mark was in the kitchen, making dinner. He smiled when he saw me. "Hey, babe. Feeling better? I thought I'd surprise you with your favorite pasta." I stared at him. This man I thought I knew so well. How could he stand there, acting so normal after what he'd done? "Sarah?" he asked, looking concerned. "You okay?" Something in me snapped. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "No, I'm not okay. Who is she, Mark?" His face went pale. "What? Who's who?" "Don't lie to me," I shouted, all my pent-up anger and hurt pouring out. "I saw you at the cafe. With her. How long has this been going on?" Mark's expression changed from shock to guilt. He slumped against the counter. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain?" I laughed bitterly. "Explain what? How you've been lying to me? Cheating on me? On our family?" "It's not what you think," he started, but I cut him off. "I saw the photos, Mark. On your computer. I know about the late nights, the business trips. I know everything." Mark looked stunned. "What, you went through my computer? Don't you dare try to turn this around on me," I yelled. "You're the one who's been sneaking around, lying, cheating." We stood there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything hanging between us. "Who is she?" I asked quietly. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Her name is Melissa. She's an intern at the office." An intern, of course, young, pretty, probably hanging on his every word. I felt sick. "How long?" I asked, not sure I wanted to know the answer. 3 months, he admitted. 3 months. 3 months of lies, of betrayal. I thought about all the family dinners, the movie nights, the times he'd told me he loved me. All lies. "I want you out," I said, my voice cold. Mark looked shocked. "What?" "Sarah, please, we can work this out. It didn't mean anything, I swear." "Didn't mean anything," I laughed humorlessly. "You threw away our marriage, our family, for something that didn't mean anything. I made a mistake," he pleaded. "I'll end it, I promise. We can go to counseling, work things out." I shook my head. "No, Mark, we can't. You broke us. You broke everything." "What about the kids?" he asked desperately. "Don't you dare use our children as an excuse," I hissed. "You should have thought about them before you started sleeping with your intern." Mark flinched at my words. Good. I wanted him to hurt, to feel even a fraction of the pain I was feeling. "I want you out of this house," I repeated. "Tonight. I don't care where you go, but you can't stay here." "Sarah, please," he begged. But I was done listening. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, out of the house, ignoring his calls behind me. I got in my car and just drove, no destination in mind. Tears blurred my vision as I replayed everything in my mind. How had we gotten here? How had my life fallen apart so completely? As the sun began to set, I found myself at a park where Mark and I used to bring the kids. I sat on a bench, watching families play, couples walk hand in hand, normal people living normal lives. My phone buzzed with messages from Mark, but I ignored them. I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. I don't know how long I sat in that park, watching the world go on around me while mine had shattered. As the sky darkened, I realized I needed to go home. The kids would be wondering where I was. The drive home felt surreal. How was I going to explain this to Emily and Jason? How do you tell your children that their father, the man they idolized, had betrayed us all? When I walked in, the house was quiet, too quiet. I found a note from our neighbor, Mrs. Johnson, saying she'd picked up the kids when neither Mark nor I showed up at the school. My heart sank. In the chaos of confronting Mark, I'd completely forgotten about picking them up. I called Mrs. Johnson, apologizing profusely and assuring her I'd be right over to get them. As I hung up, I noticed Mark's things were gone from the entryway, so he'd actually left. Part of me was relieved, but another part felt hollow. After picking up the kids and getting them settled with dinner and homework, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my phone. Missed calls and messages from Mark filled the screen. I couldn't bring myself to read them. "Mom!" Emily's voice startled me. "Where's Dad?" I looked at my daughter's innocent face and felt my heart break all over again. "Dad had to go away for a while, sweetie," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is it because of work?" she asked. I nodded, hating myself for the lie. "Something like that. Let's get you to bed, okay?" As I tucked them in, both kids peppered me with questions about when Dad would be back. I dodged as best I could, promising we'd talk more in the morning. Once they were asleep, I collapsed on the couch, exhaustion washing over me. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Mark with that woman, laughing, holding hands. The next morning, I called in sick to work again. I couldn't face anyone, not yet. As I was making breakfast for the kids, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. "Sarah, are you okay? You never miss work." I opened my mouth to lie, to say I was fine, but a sob escaped instead. "Sarah, what's wrong?" Rachel's voice was full of concern. Before I knew it, I was spilling everything. The suspicions, the investigation, following Mark, the confrontation. Rachel listened in shocked silence. "Oh, Sarah," she said when I finally finished. "I'm so sorry. What can I do?" I wiped my eyes. "I don't know. I don't know what to do, Rachel. How do I tell the kids? How do I face everyone at work?" "One step at a time," she said gently. "Do you want me to come over?" I shook my head, then realized she couldn't see me. "No, I need some time, but thank you." After hanging up, I felt a little lighter. Sharing the burden, even just a little, had helped. The day passed in a blur of mundane tasks. Laundry, dishes, helping the kids with homework. Normal things that felt anything but normal now. That evening, as I was folding laundry in my bedroom, I came across one of Mark's shirts. Without thinking, I brought it to my face, breathing in his familiar scent. Tears welled up in my eyes. How could he do this to us? A knock at the door startled me. I quickly wiped my eyes and went to answer it, expecting Mrs. Johnson or maybe Rachel. Instead, I found Mark standing there, looking haggard. "What are you doing here?" I hissed, not wanting the kids to hear. "Sarah, please," he said, his voice rough. "Can we talk?" Part of me wanted to slam the door in his face, but another part wanted answers. "The kids are asleep," I said. "We can talk on the porch." We sat on the porch swing, a careful distance between us. The same swing where we used to sit and watch sunsets, dreaming about our future. It felt like a lifetime ago. "I'm so sorry," Mark began. I cut him off. "Sorry you did it, or sorry you got caught," he flinched. "Both, I guess." "Sarah, I never meant for this to happen. It just did. Things don't just happen, Mark," I said, my voice cold. "You made choices. Over and over again, you chose her over me, over our family." "I know," he said, hanging his head. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But Sarah, please, we can fix this. We can go to counseling, work things out. I'll do anything." I looked at him, this man I'd loved for so long, the father of my children, my best friend, and now a stranger. "I don't know if this can be fixed, Mark," I said quietly. "You broke something fundamental. Trust. How can I ever trust you again?" "I'll earn it back," he said desperately. "But whatever it takes, I love you, Sarah. You and the kids are my whole world." I laughed bitterly. "Your whole world? Is that what you were thinking when you were with her?" Mark fell silent, unable to meet my eyes. "I think you should go," I said after a moment. "Sarah, please." "No, Mark, I need time to think, to process, And you need to figure out what you really want, because you can't have both. You can't have your whole world and your little fling on the side." He nodded, defeated. As he stood to leave, he turned back. "I do love you, Sarah. I know you might not believe that right now, but it's true." I didn't respond. I watched him walk to his car, watched him drive away, and then, alone on that porch swing, I finally let myself break down completely. As I cried, I realized something. This pain, this betrayal, it wasn't going to break me. I was stronger than that. For myself, for my kids, I would get through this. I didn't know what the future held, whether Mark and I could ever repair what he'd broken. But I did know one thing. Whatever happened, I would survive. I would thrive. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of dread and determination. I knew I had to face the world, face my life, but I felt like I was walking into a storm without an umbrella. The kids were quiet at breakfast, sensing something was off, but not knowing what. "Where's Dad?" Jason asked, pushing his cereal around his bowl. I took a deep breath. "Kids, we need to talk about that. Your dad, he's going to be staying somewhere else for a while." Emily's eyes widened. "Are you and Dad getting a divorce?" The word hit me like a punch to the gut. Divorce. It seems so final, so irreversible. "I don't know, sweetheart. Right now, we're just taking some time apart." "But why?" Jason demanded, his little face scrunched up in confusion. I struggled to find the right words. How do you explain adultery to a 6-year-old? "Sometimes, grown-ups need space to figure things out," I said finally. "But I want you both to know that no matter what happens between me and your dad, we both love you very, very much." The rest of the morning was a blur of tears and questions I couldn't fully answer. By the time I dropped them off at school, I felt emotionally drained. But I knew I had to keep going. I had classes to teach, a life to live. Walking into the school, I felt like everyone was staring at me. Did they know? Had word gotten out? But of course, life went on. My colleagues smiled and waved as always, oblivious to the turmoil in my personal life. Halfway through my first class, as I was explaining the symbolism in To Kill a Mockingbird, it hit me. I was standing here, teaching, going through the motions of normal life, while my whole world had fallen apart. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. During lunch, Rachel found me in my classroom. "How are you holding up?" she asked gently. I shrugged. "I'm here. I'm functioning. That's something, right?" She squeezed my hand. "It's a lot, Sarah. You're stronger than you know." As the final bell rang, I steeled myself for what came next. I'd agreed to meet Mark at a coffee shop to discuss our situation. Part of me wanted to cancel, to hide away and never face him again, but I knew we had to talk for the kids' sake if nothing else. I spotted him as soon as I walked in. He looked terrible, with dark circles under his eyes and his clothes rumpled. For a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. Then I remembered why we were here, and my heart hardened. "Sarah," he said as I sat down, "thank you for coming." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "I've been thinking," he started, "about everything, about us. I know I messed up badly, but I want to fix this. I want to make it right." I looked at him, really looked at him, the man I'd loved for so long, the father of my children, and now a stranger. "How, Mark? How can you possibly make this right?" He leaned forward, his eyes pleading. "Counseling. I'll go to therapy, alone and with you if you're willing. I'll change jobs so I never have to see her again. I'll do whatever it takes. Sarah, please, just give me a chance." Part of me wanted to believe him, wanted to think we could go back to how things were. But another part, a stronger part, knew that was impossible. "And what about trust, Mark?" I asked quietly. How can I ever trust you again? Every time you're late from work, every business trip, every text message, I'll always wonder, is that any way to live?" He hung his head. I know I broke your trust, but Sarah, we have history, we have children. Doesn't that count for something?" I felt tears welling up and blinked them away furiously. I wouldn't cry. Not here, not now. It counts for everything, Mark. That's why this hurts so much. You didn't just betray me. You betrayed our family, our life. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our broken marriage hanging between us. What do you want, Sarah? He asked finally. I took a deep breath. I want time to think, to process. I can't make any decisions right now, Mark. It's all too raw. He nodded, looking deflated. And the kids? We tell them the truth, I said firmly. An age-appropriate version, but the truth. They deserve that much. As we stood to leave, Mark reached out as if to hug me, then stopped himself. I do love you, Sarah. I know you might not believe that right now, but it's true. I looked at him, this man who had been my whole world for so long. I believe you think you do, I said softly. But love isn't just a feeling, Mark. It's a choice. And you chose her. Walking out of that coffee shop, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness, anger, fear, but also relief. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like I could breathe. I didn't know what the future held, whether Mark and I would find a way to repair our marriage or if this was truly the end. But I did know one thing. I was stronger than I'd ever given myself credit for. And whatever happened, I would survive. I would thrive. As I drove home, I found myself thinking about my students, about the literature we studied. How many times had I talked to them about character growth, about overcoming adversity? Now it was my turn to live those lessons. This wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, and I was ready to write it on my own terms. The days after my meeting with Mark blurred together in a haze of routine and hidden pain. I'd wake up, get the kids ready for school, teach my classes, come home, help with homework, make dinner, and then collapse into bed. Emotionally drained, rinse and repeat. It was during one of these nights, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, that the weight of everything finally crashed down on me. I curled up into a ball and sobbed, muffling my cries with a pillow so I wouldn't wake the kids. How had my life come to this? I'd done everything right. I'd been a good wife, a loving mother, a dedicated teacher. And for what? To be betrayed? To have my world shattered? The next morning, I called in sick. I couldn't face another day of pretending everything was fine when inside. I was falling apart. As I sat at the kitchen table, nursing a cold cup of coffee, my phone buzzed. It was Rachel. Sarah, are you okay? You never miss work 2 days in a row. I opened my mouth to say I was fine, but what came out was a choked sob. I'm coming over, Rachel said firmly, and hung up before I could protest. 20 minutes later, she was at my door, armed with a pint of ice cream and a determined look. All right, she said, settling onto the couch next to me. Talk. And so I did. I poured out everything, my fears, my anger, my crushing sense of inadequacy. Rachel listened, offering tissues and ice cream as needed. I just feel so lost, I finished, wiping my eyes, like I don't know who I am anymore. Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said, You know, maybe that's not such a bad thing. I looked at her, confused. Hear me out, she continued. You've been Mark's wife for so long. Maybe this is your chance to figure out who Sarah is, on her own terms. Her words struck a chord. Who was I, without Mark? I'd been so focused on being a wife and mother, I'd forgotten how to just be me. But how? I asked. How do I even start? Rachel grinned. Well, for starters, how about we get you out of this house? There's a new art exhibit downtown. Let's go check it out. I hesitated. The thought of going out, of facing the world, was daunting. But the alternative, staying in this house, wallowing in my misery, seemed even worse. Okay, I said, surprising myself. Let's do it. The exhibit was interesting. Modern art had never really been my thing. But as we walked through the gallery, I found myself drawn to certain pieces. There was one in particular, a canvas split in two, one side dark and chaotic, the other bright and orderly. "It's like my life," I murmured, staring at it. Rachel squeezed my arm. "Maybe, but remember, you get to choose which side you want to live in." As we left the gallery, I felt lighter somehow. Not happy, exactly, but less burdened. We grabbed coffee at a nearby cafe, and for the first time in weeks, I found myself laughing at one of Rachel's jokes. "See?" she said, smiling. "The world hasn't ended. You're still here. Still breathing." I nodded, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Yeah, I guess I am." Over the next few weeks, I made a conscious effort to rediscover myself. I joined a book club, something I'd always wanted to do but never had time for. I started taking evening walks, just me and my thoughts. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. Really looked at myself, for the first time in a long time. The woman staring back at me looked tired. Yes, but there was something else in her eyes. A spark of determination, of resilience. "You've got this," I told my reflection, and for the first time, I believed it. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still days when the pain felt overwhelming, when I'd see a happy couple and feel a pang of loss so acute it took my breath away. Mark and I continued to navigate our new reality. We set up a schedule for the kids, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy for them. It was hard, seeing him during these exchanges, remembering the life we'd had. One day, as he was dropping off the kids, Mark paused at the door. "Sarah," he said hesitantly, I'm sorry for everything. I know it doesn't change anything, but I need you to know that." I looked at him, this man who had been my whole world for so long. Part of me wanted to scream at him, to make him feel even a fraction of the pain I'd felt. But another part, a stronger part, just felt peace. "I know," I said simply, and I did. It didn't erase what he'd done, didn't magically fix everything, but it was a start. As I watched him drive away, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't okay. Not yet. But I would be. That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, Emily asked, "Mom, are you sad?" I paused, considering my answer carefully. "Sometimes," I said honestly, "but I'm also hopeful. And you know what? I'm proud of us. We're doing okay, aren't we?" She nodded, snuggling into her pillow. "Yeah, we are." As I closed her door, I felt a surge of love for my children, for the little family we were building in this new reality. Later, as I sat on the porch swing, the same one where Mark and I used to watch sunsets, I thought about the journey I'd been on. The pain, the anger, the despair, but also the growth, the self-discovery. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before Mark's betrayal. I was stronger now, more resilient. I'd been broken, yes, but I was putting myself back together, piece by piece. And the woman emerging from the wreckage, she was someone I was starting to like, someone I was proud to be. As I watched the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't the life I'd planned, not by a long shot, but it was my life, and I was ready to embrace it, challenges and all. As the weeks turned into months, I found myself settling into a new rhythm. The pain of Mark's betrayal was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but it no longer consumed me. I was learning to live with it, to move forward despite it. One morning, as I was getting ready for work, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. The woman staring back at me looked different, stronger, more confident. I smiled at my reflection, realizing how far I'd come. At school, things were looking up too. I'd thrown myself into my work, channeling my energy into my students. It was paying off. My class discussions were more vibrant than ever. And I'd even started an after-school book club for students who wanted to dive deeper into literature. Mrs. Thompson, Lisa, one of my students, approached me after class one day. I just wanted to say, your class has really helped me, not just with English, but, well, with everything. I felt a lump in my throat. Thank you, Lisa, that means a lot. As she left, I thought about how my own struggles had made me a better teacher, more empathetic to what my students might be going through. At home, the kids were adapting too. There were still tough moments, of course. Nights when Jason would cry for his dad, or when Emily would get quiet and withdrawn. But we were figuring it out, together. One evening, as we were having our weekly movie night, Emily turned to me. Mom, are you and Dad ever getting back together? I paused the movie, taking a deep breath. Honey, I don't think so. Your dad and I, we care about each other, and we both love you and Jason very much. But sometimes, adults realize they can't be together anymore. It doesn't mean we're not still a family, just a different kind of family. She nodded, looking thoughtful. I think I understand. And Mom? I'm proud of you. I pulled her into a hug, feeling my eyes well up. Thank you, sweetie. I'm proud of us too. As for Mark, well, that was complicated. We were civil with each other, focused on co-parenting the kids. But every time I saw him, I felt a mix of emotions. Anger, sadness, and a lingering affection that I wasn't sure would ever fully go away. One day, as he was picking up the kids for the weekend, he hesitated at the door. Sarah, I heard about your book club at school. That's really great. I was surprised by the genuine warmth in his voice. Thanks, Mark. It's been good for me. He nodded, looking like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. As he turned to leave, I found myself speaking. You know, Mark, I think I'm finally at a place where I can say this. I forgive you. He looked stunned. Sarah, thank you. I know I don't deserve it. It's not about deserving, I said softly. It's about me letting go of the anger. It's exhausting, being angry all the time. As I watched him drive away with the kids, I felt a sense of closure. Forgiving Mark didn't mean forgetting what he'd done or wanting him back. It meant freeing myself from the burden of resentment. That night, I sat on the porch swing, thinking about how much had changed. I'd gone from a woman devastated by betrayal to someone who was not just surviving, but thriving. My phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. Drinks tomorrow to celebrate your promotion. I smiled, remembering the news I'd received earlier that week. The principal had offered me the position of department head for English. It was a big step up, one I wasn't sure I was ready for. But then I thought about everything I'd overcome in the past year, and I realized I was more than ready. As I texted back a resounding yes, I felt a surge of excitement for the future. For the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to what came next. The next day at work, I overheard two of my colleagues whispering in the teacher's lounge. Did you hear about Mark Thompson? Apparently, he got fired from his firm. Something about inappropriate behavior with an intern. I felt a moment of satisfaction, quickly followed by pity. Mark had made his choices, and now he was facing the consequences. But I no longer took joy in his misfortune. I had my own life to focus on. That evening, as I got ready for drinks with Rachel, I put on a dress I hadn't worn in years. It was bolder than my usual style, but as I looked in the mirror, I realized it fit the new me perfectly. At the bar, Rachel raised her glass in a toast. To Sarah Thompson, kicking ass and taking names. I laughed, clinking my glass against hers. To new beginnings, I added. As we chatted and laughed, I found myself thinking about the journey I'd been on. The pain, the struggles, the moments of despair, but also the growth, the self-discovery, the newfound strength. I wasn't the same woman I'd been before Mark's betrayal. I was stronger now, more resilient. I'd been broken, yes, but I'd put myself back together, piece by piece, and the woman who'd emerged, she was someone I was proud to be. Later that night, As I walked home under a sky full of stars, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. This wasn't the life I'd planned, not by a long shot, but it was my life, and it was a good one. I thought about my kids, my job, my friends. I thought about the challenges I'd overcome and the ones still to come. And I smiled, because I knew, deep in my heart, that whatever life threw at me next, I was ready for it. I was Sarah Thompson, survivor, fighter, and now, thriver. As I reached my front door, I paused for a moment, looking up at the night sky. "Thank you," I whispered to no one in particular, for the strength I'd found, for the lessons I'd learned, for the life I was now living. Then I went inside, ready to face whatever tomorrow might bring, because this wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning of a whole new chapter, and I couldn't wait to see what came next.